The crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek. But it wasn't the shot that silenced the crowd, it was Willa Kincaid's voice, clear and unwavering, as she stood on the wooden steps of the general store in her faded blue dress, her auburn hair whipping in the autumn wind of 1878. "This isn't justice. You're hanging a man without a fair trial, and you all know it." Willa's words fell on the assembled townsfolk like stones in still water, creating ripples of uncomfortable silence. The Montana Territory sun beat down mercilessly as Sheriff Donovan's face darkened to a dangerous shade of crimson. At 23, Willa had developed a reputation for speaking her mind, but this time she had gone too far, challenging the sheriff and the town's most powerful rancher in one breath. "That's enough out of you, Miss Kincaid," Sheriff Donovan snarled, nodding to his deputies. "Seems to me you need some time to reconsider your position. Can't have women stirring up trouble when justice is being served." Rough hands seized her arms. Willa struggled against their grip, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "Justice? Is that what you call framing an innocent man for a crime he didn't commit? Everyone knows Reginald Miller's land is the only thing standing between Mr. Hartford and his precious railroad deal." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few murmurs of agreement rose from the assembled townsfolk, but nobody stepped forward. Hartford, the wealthiest cattle baron in the territory, merely adjusted his expensive vest and gave a dismissive wave. "Lock her up," Hartford commanded. "The barn at my north property should do. Nobody'll hear her troublemaking out there, and maybe a night or two without comforts will teach her to mind her tongue." Willa caught a glimpse of her father's anguished face as they dragged her away. Jonathan Kincaid took a halting step forward, then stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As the town's only doctor, he was caught in an impossible position. Hartford's wife was gravely ill, and antagonizing the man could mean being barred from treating her. "Papa." Willa called out, but her father's eyes dropped to the ground. Her heart sank as they forced her into a wagon. The journey to Hartford's north property seemed interminable. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rolling plains. The barn loomed dark and forbidding against the purple twilight sky. "In you go," one deputy grunted, shoving her through the wide doors. The interior smelled of hay and horse, with shafts of dying sunlight streaming through cracks in the wooden walls. "Mr. Hartford says you can have the night to think about your behavior. Maybe by morning you'll have learned to keep women's opinions to yourself." The other deputy produced heavy chains and a padlock. "Just to make sure you stay put," he said with a smirk, threading the chains through the barn door's handles and securing them with the lock. "You can't do this," Willa protested, rushing forward only to have the doors slammed in her face. The sound of the padlock clicking shut was followed by the deputies' laughter fading as they mounted their horses and rode away. Willa pounded on the doors, then slumped against them, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. Through a crack, she watched the deputies disappear down the dirt road, leaving her alone with only the occasional rustling of the hay and the distant lowing of cattle for company. Hours passed. The barn grew cold as night descended fully, and Willa huddled in a corner, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. A small lantern hung from a post near the doors, casting just enough light to keep the darkness at bay. Her thoughts turned to Reginald Miller, likely spending his last night alive for a crime he didn't commit, all because he refused to sell his land to Hartford. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sometime after midnight made her scramble to her feet. Peering through a crack in the barn wall, she saw a solitary rider dismounting from a magnificent black stallion. The man moved with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but in the moonlight, she could make out a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. He approached the barn cautiously, his spurs jingling softly with each step. When he reached the chained doors, he paused, examining the heavy lock. "Hello, is anyone in there?" His voice was deep, with a hint of Texas in its drawl. Willa pressed her face to the crack. "Yes, I'm in here. They locked me in." "Miss Kincaid?" he asked, sounding surprised. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, suspicion creeping into her voice. I was in town today, saw what happened. He hesitated. Name's Ben Quinn, most folks call me Ben. I work at the Rockingham Ranch just over the ridge. Mr. Quinn, they've imprisoned me for speaking the truth, Willa said urgently. Reginald Miller is innocent and they plan to hang him tomorrow at dawn. There was a long silence, and for a moment, Willa feared he had left. Then came the sound of metal against metal. Stand back from the door, Miss Kincaid, Ben instructed. I'm going to cut these chains. Willa backed away, hope rising in her chest. The metallic sounds continued, accompanied by grunts of effort. Finally, there was a loud snap, and the doors swung open, revealing her rescuer. Ben Quinn stood framed in the doorway, bolt cutters in hand, the moonlight silvering his dark hair. His eyes, a startling blue even in the dim light, met hers with a mix of concern and determination. Are you all right, Miss Kincaid? He asked, setting the bolt cutters aside. Yes, thank you, Willa said, stepping forward on shaky legs. But we must hurry. They'll hang Miller at dawn. Ben ran a hand through his hair. That's more complicated than just cutting a lock. The whole town will be there, including Hartford and the sheriff. I can't let an innocent man die, Willa insisted, her chin lifting in determination. Not when I know the truth. Something in her expression seemed to affect Ben. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I've heard rumors about Miller's case myself. Something didn't sit right. He gestured toward his horse. Can you ride? Since I was 6, Willa answered, already moving toward the door. Then we'd best get moving. We'll need help, and I know just where to find it. As Ben helped her mount behind him on the stallion, Willa couldn't help asking, why are you doing this? You don't know me, and you're risking everything. Ben adjusted his hat and clicked his tongue, urging the horse forward. Let's just say I've got my own reasons for not trusting Hartford and his kind. Besides, he added, glancing back at her with the hint of a smile, my ma raised me to recognize courage when I see it. The horse broke into a gallop, carrying them across the moonlit prairie toward what Willa knew would be either justice or ruin for them both. They rode hard through the night, the powerful stallion eating up the miles beneath them. Willa clung to Ben's broad back, the warmth of him a shield against the chill night air. The endless Montana sky stretched above them, a canopy of stars so bright and numerous they seemed close enough to touch. Where are we going? Willa called over the thundering hoofbeats. To see a friend, Ben answered, his voice carried back to her on the wind. A man who has as much reason to hate Hartford as Miller does. They crested a ridge and Ben reined in the horse. Below them, nestled in a small valley, was a modest ranch house with a barn and corral. A single lamp burned in the window, a beacon in the darkness. That's Jack Thornton's place, Ben explained as they descended the slope. He used to be the marshal in these parts before Hartford had him run out of office. If anyone will help us, it's Jack. As they approached, the front door opened and a man stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Identify yourself, he called out, his voice carrying the authority of his former position. It's Ben Quinn, Jack. I've got someone with me who needs your help. The man lowered his rifle slightly but didn't put it down. Come into the light. Ben guided his horse to the front of the house, then dismounted before helping Willa down. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. Ben's hand caught her elbow, steadying her with a gentle strength that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Jack Thornton was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a face weathered by years under the Montana sun. His eyes, however, were sharp and alert as he took in Willa's disheveled appearance. Miss Kincaid, he said, recognition dawning, you're the doctor's daughter. Yes, sir, Willa replied. I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but it's urgent. Jack nodded and gestured them inside. Any enemy of Hartford is welcome here. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with a fire burning low in the hearth. Jack's wife, Martha, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked dark hair, immediately set about making coffee and finding a blanket for Willa. Hartford had her locked in his barn for speaking out about Miller's case, Ben explained as they settled around the kitchen table. Jack's expression hardened. That man has ruled this county like his personal kingdom for too long, but what do you plan to do? The hanging's set for dawn, and Hartford will have his men watching for any trouble. I thought you might have some ideas, Ben said. And maybe some friends who still remember what justice actually means. The former marshal stroked his beard thoughtfully. There are a few men I trust, good men who have been waiting for a chance to stand against Hartford. He looked at Willa. But first, I need to know exactly what you know about Miller's case, miss. Willa straightened her shoulders. Reginald Miller is accused of rustling Hartford's cattle and killing one of his ranch hands when caught in the act. But 3 nights ago, I was returning home late from delivering Mrs. Peterson's baby when I saw Hartford's foreman, Silas Tucker, meeting with 2 men I didn't recognize at the edge of town. They were arguing about payment for a job. She paused to take a sip of the coffee Martha had placed before her. The next morning, Miller was arrested for the rustling and murder that had supposedly happened that same night. It made no sense. Miller is 60 years old with a bad hip. How could he rustle cattle and overpower a young ranch hand? So you think Tucker framed Miller on Hartford's orders, Jack said. Willa nodded. I'm certain of it. And there's more. Last week, I overheard Hartford telling my father that the railroad was offering top dollar for land along Crystal Creek, which runs right through Miller's property. Miller has refused to sell for years. Ben and Jack exchanged meaningful looks. That fits with what I've heard, Ben said. Hartford's been buying up land all along that proposed railroad route. Miller's the last holdout. And with Miller hung for murder, his land would go to auction, Jack added grimly, where Hartford's money would ensure he was the only serious bidder. We can't let that happen, Willa insisted, but I don't know how to prove any of this. You may not have to, Jack said, rising from his chair with renewed purpose. Sometimes all it takes is enough good people willing to stand up and demand the truth. He turned to his wife. Martha, I need you to ride to Jim Calloway's place. Tell him it's time to repay that favor he owes me. As Martha nodded and hurried to dress, Jack turned to Ben. Can you get to the Parkers and the Wilsons? They've both lost grazing land to Hartford's expanding empire. I'll ride out now, Ben agreed. Already moving toward the door, he paused, looking back at Willa. You should stay here where it's safe. Willa shook her head firmly. This started with me and I'll see it through. Besides, my testimony about what I saw is crucial. A mixture of admiration and concern crossed Ben's face. You're either the bravest or the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Miss Kincaid. Probably both, she replied with a small smile. Jack handed Willa a pistol. Can you use this? My father taught me. He said a woman alone in these territories should know how to protect herself. Smart man, Jack commented. You ride with me then. We'll gather more support in town. There are plenty who have suffered under Hartford's thumb who just need someone to follow. As they prepared to leave, Ben approached Willa. Be careful, he said softly, his blue eyes holding hers. Hartford won't take kindly to being challenged like this. Neither do I, Willa replied, surprised by the steel in her own voice. The corner of Ben's mouth lifted in a half-smile that transformed his serious face. I believe that, Miss Kincaid, I surely do. They parted ways in the yard, Ben mounting his stallion and galloping off toward the distant ranches, while Willa climbed onto a horse Jack provided. As they set off toward town by a different route, Willa found herself looking back over her shoulder, watching Ben's silhouette disappear into the night, and wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought him to her rescue. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, the stars fading as they raced against the approaching dawn. Willa's thoughts were divided between the urgent mission ahead and the mysterious cowboy who had cut her free. There was something about Ben Quinn that intrigued her, a quiet strength and a sense of deep-rooted principles that resonated with her own. How do you know Ben? She asked Jack as they rode side by side. He came to these parts about 2 years ago, Jack replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. Doesn't talk much about his past, but he's a good man. One of the few who stood by me when Hartford had me removed as marshal. He gave her a sidelong glance. He's also one of the best horsemen I've ever seen. The Rocking M was lucky to get him. He risked a lot to help me, Willa mused. Jack nodded. That's Ben. He doesn't look for trouble, but he won't shy away when it finds him, especially if someone weaker is being wronged. After a moment, he added, Hartford tried to buy the Rockingham last year. The owner, old McAllister, refused to sell. Shortly after, some of their cattle turned up dead, poisoned water hole. Nothing could be proven, but everyone knew Hartford was behind it, Willa finished grimly. Just like everyone knows Miller is innocent, Jack agreed. The question is, will enough people be willing to stand up and say so? They reached the outskirts of Willow Creek just as the eastern sky was turning a pale rose. Already, people were gathering in the town square, where a gallows had been hastily constructed the previous day. Willa's stomach clenched at the sight of the noose swinging gently in the morning breeze. Jack led them to a small house on the edge of town, belonging to his former deputy, Michael Hayes. There they found several men already gathered, their faces solemn in the pre-dawn light. Jack quickly explained the situation, and Willa repeated what she had witnessed. "I always knew Hartford was crooked," Hayes said when she finished, "but framing a man for murder to steal his land, that's a new low." "The question is, what can we do?" asked another man. "Hartford has the sheriff and half the town in his pocket. We make sure everyone hears the truth," Jack said firmly, "and we show Hartford that he doesn't own this town." The sound of approaching horses made them all tense, but it was Ben who appeared in the doorway, accompanied by 3 ranchers, the Parkers and Wilson, as promised, along with several of their ranch hands. "We've got more coming," Ben announced, his eyes finding Willa's immediately. The relief in his expression when he saw her safe made her heart beat a little faster. "The Callaways are spreading the word to others. Martha's gone to fetch your father, Miss Kincaid. We thought having the town doctor present might help our cause." "Good thinking," Jack approved. "Now, here's what we're going to do." As the group huddled together finalizing their plan, Willa found herself standing next to Ben. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet, this isn't over." "Whatever happens," she pressed, "I want you to know I'm grateful. Not many would have stopped to help." Ben looked down at her, his expression softening. "I couldn't just ride past, knowing you were locked up for speaking the truth." After a pause, he added with a hint of a smile, "Besides, it's not every day a man gets to rescue a lady from a locked barn." Despite the gravity of their situation, Willa found herself smiling back. "Is that a regular occurrence in Texas, then, rescuing imprisoned ladies?" "Only the especially troublesome ones," he teased, the warmth in his eyes belying the jest in his words. Their moment was interrupted as Jack called everyone to attention. "It's time," he announced. "The hanging is scheduled for 7 o'clock. We need to be in position well before then." The group moved out, splitting into smaller parties to avoid drawing attention. Willa found herself walking toward the town square with Ben and 2 of the ranch hands, taking a roundabout route through back alleys. The town was more crowded than usual for such an early hour, with people gathering to witness the grim spectacle of a hanging. Willa's heart ached at the thought that some viewed this as entertainment rather than the grave miscarriage of justice it truly was. As they neared the square, Ben suddenly pulled her into the shadow of a building as a group of Hartford's men rode past, the sheriff among them. "They're looking for you," he whispered, his body shielding hers from view. Willa was acutely aware of his closeness, of the solid warmth of him and the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to his clothes. "They know I've escaped," she realized. "Hartford must have sent someone to check on me." Ben nodded grimly. "We need to be extra careful. If they spot you before we're ready, they'll arrest you again or worse." The implication hung in the air between them. Hartford wouldn't risk leaving loose ends, not with so much at stake. "I'm not afraid," Willa declared, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. Ben studied her face for a long moment. "No, I don't suppose you are," he said softly. "But I am. For you." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Before Willa could respond, a bell began to toll from the church steeple, signaling the approach of 7 o'clock. "The time had come. Stay close to me," Ben instructed, his hand finding hers and holding tight. "Whatever happens, don't let go." Together, they slipped out of hiding and made their way to the edge of the crowd, where Jack and the others were strategically positioned. Across the square, Willa spotted her father arriving with Martha Thornton, his medical bag in hand, a precaution they all hoped wouldn't be necessary. In the center of the square, Reginald Miller stood on the gallows platform, his hands bound behind his back, his elderly face dignified despite the fear evident in his eyes. Sheriff Donovan stood beside him, reading the charges in a loud, official voice. Hartford watched from a position of prominence, smugness radiating from his well-fed form. Willa squeezed Ben's hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. The moment had arrived to make their stand. Justice or ruin, there would be no middle ground. The sheriff's voice boomed across the square, and having been found guilty of cattle rustling and the murder of Samuel Jenkins, Reginald Miller is hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. He turned to Miller. "Have you any last words?" The elderly rancher lifted his chin. "Only that I am innocent of these charges, and God knows it, even if this town chooses not to." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hartford shifted impatiently and nodded to the sheriff, who moved toward the lever that would open the trapdoor beneath Miller's feet. "Now," Jack whispered, and their group began to move forward, pushing through the crowd. "Stop," Willa cried out, her voice ringing clear in the morning air. "You are about to hang an innocent man." All heads turned toward her. The sheriff's hand froze on the lever and Hartford's face contorted with rage. "Arrest that woman," he bellowed, pointing at Willa. "She's interfering with the law." Two deputies started forward, but found their path blocked by Ben, Jack, and the ranchers who had rallied to their cause. "The only interference with the law is happening right there," Jack announced, pointing at the gallows. "Reginald Miller has been falsely accused to serve Hartford's greed." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, with some voices rising in support and others in opposition. Willa stepped forward, still holding Ben's hand, drawing courage from the contact. "I have evidence," she declared. "3 nights ago, I witnessed Hartford's foreman, Silas Tucker, meeting with 2 strangers and arguing over payment for a job the very night Miller supposedly rustled cattle and committed murder." The crowd fell silent, all eyes on her. Willa could feel the weight of their attention, the critical balance of this moment. From the corner of her eye, she saw Hartford gesturing frantically to his men. "That's a lie," Tucker shouted from his position near Hartford. "The girl's making up stories." "Am I?" Willa challenged. "Then explain how a 60-year-old man with a bad hip managed to rustle cattle and overpower Samuel Jenkins, who was half his age and twice his size. Explain why this happened just as Hartford was trying to buy Miller's land for the railroad coming through." The crowd was fully engaged now, whispers spreading like wildfire. Hartford's face had gone from red to purple with fury. "This is absurd," he blustered. "Sheriff, do your duty." Sheriff Donovan looked uncertain, his gaze moving between Hartford and the increasingly restless crowd. More people were arriving by the minute, drawn by the commotion. Ben stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "I think we'd all like to hear more about this railroad deal, Hartford, especially those of us who have been pressured to sell our land for far less than it's worth. Or those who have had mysterious accidents when they refused," added Parker, one of the ranchers. "Or those who have been run out of office for not looking the other way," Jack put in, his former authority evident in his bearing. Hartford's composure was crumbling. "This is nothing but slander." "You have no proof." "Perhaps not yet," came a new voice, and the crowd parted to reveal a man Willa didn't recognize, dressed in the attire of a federal marshal. "But I'd say there's enough concern here to warrant an investigation before hanging a man." "Marshal Davis," the sheriff acknowledged, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "We weren't expecting federal involvement in this matter." "Clearly," the marshal replied dryly. "I received some interesting telegrams about unusual land dealings in this area. Thought I'd come see for myself." He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Miller on the gallows, then on Hartford's reddening face. "I suggest we postpone this execution pending a full investigation," Hartford exploded. "You can't do that. The trial is over. The sentence was passed." "Actually, I can," Marshal Davis countered calmly, "especially when there are serious questions about the validity of the evidence." He turned to the sheriff. "Release Mr. Miller into my custody, Sheriff Donovan." "Unless you'd prefer I include obstruction of justice in my report to the federal judge." The sheriff hesitated, then grudgingly moved to untie Miller. The elderly rancher's legs nearly gave out as the tension left him, and 2 men hurried up to help him down from the platform. Hartford was not ready to concede. "Tucker," he shouted to his foreman, "don't just stand there." Tucker drew his gun, as did several of Hartford's men, but they found themselves facing not only Marshal Davis but also Ben, Jack, and at least 20 armed ranchers and townspeople. "I wouldn't," Ben advised quietly, his own revolver steady in his hand. For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then Tucker slowly lowered his weapon, a calculating look crossing his face. "Mr. Hartford," he said slowly, "I think it's time we had a different conversation." Hartford's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not hanging for you," Tucker replied. "You wanted Miller's land for the railroad. You told me to make it happen. You said to make it look like rustling gone wrong." He looked at the marshal. "I've got proof letters in his handwriting." Hartford lunged at Tucker with a roar of rage, only to be restrained by the sheriff and his remaining loyal deputy. "It seems we have a great deal to investigate," Marshal Davis observed, his tone almost conversational despite the gravity of the situation. He nodded to Willa. "Young lady, I believe I owe you my thanks. It takes considerable courage to stand against power the way you have." As the marshal began organizing the arrest of Hartford and the taking of statements from witnesses, the crowd dispersed into excited groups, the hanging forgotten in the wake of the dramatic turn of events. Miller was seated on a bench, being examined by Dr. Kincaid. While tears of relief streamed down his weathered cheeks, Willa found herself standing slightly apart from the commotion, the enormity of what had just happened washing over her. Ben appeared at her side, holstering his weapon. "You did it," he said simply. "You saved an innocent man's life." "We did it," Willa corrected, suddenly exhausted. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Ben looked down at their hands, still joined from the moment they had stepped into the square together. Gently, he brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "Somehow I think you'd have found a way," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "You're not one to stay locked up for long, Miss Kincaid." Willa smiled up at him, feeling something shift between them, a connection forged in danger and shared purpose, but evolving into something else entirely. "I think, after all we've been through, you might call me Willa." Ben's answering smile transformed his face, lighting his blue eyes with warmth. "Willa," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "I'd like that." In the midst of the town square's chaos, with justice finally prevailing and a new day truly dawning, Willa felt as though she were standing at the threshold of something profound and life-changing. And somehow, she knew it had as much to do with the man still holding her hand as it did with the events they had just survived together. The aftermath unfolded over the following days, like a spring river breaking through winter ice, unstoppable and transformative. Hartford and Tucker were taken to the territorial capital to await trial, along with the two men Willa had seen that fateful night, who were quickly tracked down and arrested. Sheriff Donovan, facing scrutiny for his role in the affair, resigned his position, and to everyone's satisfaction, Jack Thornton was appointed interim sheriff until a proper election could be held. Reginald Miller returned to his ranch, his name cleared, and his determination to maintain his independence only strengthened by his ordeal. He made it known throughout the territory that his land was not for sale, not to the railroad or anyone else. As for Willa, she found herself at the center of the town's attention, praised by some for her bravery and eyed warily by others who had supported Hartford. Her father, initially torn between pride in his daughter and fear for her safety, ultimately embraced her actions. "You remind me so much of your mother," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their modest home. "She never could abide injustice either, would have done exactly what you did." Willa smiled at the comparison. Her mother had died when she was 12, but the memory of her fierce spirit and boundless compassion remained a guiding light in Willa's life. "I just did what needed doing," she said simply. Dr. Kincaid squeezed her hand. "That's what courage is, my dear. Not the absence of fear, but doing what's right despite it." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a horse and rider. Even in the fading light, Willa recognized the silhouette of Ben Quinn on his black stallion. Her heart quickened its pace, as it had taken to doing whenever he appeared over the past several days. "Looks like you have a visitor," her father observed, a knowing smile playing at his lips. I think I'll turn in early tonight. Papa, Willa protested weakly, but doctor. Kincaid was already rising from his chair, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Good evening, Mr. Quinn, he called as Ben dismounted and secured his horse to the hitching post. Evening, Doc, Ben replied, removing his hat as he approached the porch. Hope I'm not intruding, not at all. I was just heading inside. Been a long day of patience. The doctor clapped Ben on the shoulder as he passed. You two enjoy the evening. It's a fine night for star-gazing. Willa felt a flush creeping up her neck at her father's less than subtle encouragement. Ben ascended the porch steps, hat in hand, a hint of uncertainty in his normally confident bearing. Your father seems to be in good spirits, he observed, taking the chair Dr. Kincaid had vacated. He's pleased with how things turned out, Willa replied. We all are. Ben nodded, looking out across the town where lamps were being lit in windows as twilight deepened. Jack's already making changes as sheriff, appointed Michael Hayes as his deputy again. Things are shifting for the better. And what about you? Willa asked, studying his profile in the gathering dusk. Will you stay at the Rockingham? Ben was quiet for a moment. McAllister's offered me a partnership, he said finally. Says he's getting too old to manage the place alone and has no family to pass it to. Wants someone who knows horses and cares about the land. That's wonderful, Willa exclaimed. You'd be perfect for it. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. It would mean putting down roots, staying in one place. And is that something you want? Ben's gaze held her steadily. It is now, he said quietly. Found reasons to stay that I didn't have before. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken meaning. Willa's heart beat a rapid tattoo against her ribs as she realized what he was saying and what he was asking. I'm glad, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. Willa, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past days, he paused, searching for words. I've never met anyone like you, your courage, your heart. He shook his head, a smile touching his lips. From the moment I cut those bolts and you stepped out of that barn, determined to save a man's life even at risk of your own, I knew you were something special. Willa felt warm despite the evening chill, her pulse fluttering like a captured bird. And here I thought you were just a passing knight-errant, rescuing damsels in distress. Nothing passing about it, Ben assured her, reaching out to take her hand. His touch was warm, his calloused palm a testament to years of hard work. I'd like to call on you properly, if that would be agreeable. Get to know you better outside of jailbreaks and confrontations with corrupt businessmen. A laugh bubbled up from Willa's chest, releasing some of the tension. I'd like that very much, Ben Quinn. His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good, that's good. He seemed almost boyish in his relief, this man who had faced down armed adversaries without flinching. They fell into conversation as stars began to appear above them, talking of their pasts and hopes for the future. Ben told her of growing up on a small farm in Texas, of losing his parents to fever when he was 18, of working his way north with nothing but his horse and his skills. Willa shared stories of learning medicine at her father's side, of her dreams of perhaps becoming a doctor herself someday, despite the obstacles facing women in the profession. If anyone could do it, you could, Ben said with such conviction that Willa could almost believe it herself. The hour grew late and finally, Ben rose to leave, though he seemed reluctant to do so. At the bottom of the porch steps, he turned back to her, his expression soft in the moonlight. I almost forgot, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. I brought you something. He held out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Willa unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate wooden carving of a horse in mid-gallop, its lines flowing and graceful. It's beautiful, she breathed, running a finger over the smooth surface. Carved it myself, Ben admitted. Not much else to do during the long winter evenings. Thought you might like a reminder that there's always freedom to be found, even when it seems like the world is trying to lock you in. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Willa deeply. I'll treasure it, she promised. Thank you. Ben nodded, seeming pleased with her reaction. Good night, Willa, he said softly, replacing his hat. Good night, Ben. He mounted his horse and rode away, looking back once to lift his hand in farewell. Willa remained on the porch long after he had disappeared from view, the wooden horse cradled in her palm, her thoughts full of possibilities that hadn't existed just days ago. Inside, she found her father still awake, reading by lamplight in the parlor. He looked up as she entered, his eyebrows raised in silent question. "He's asked to call on me," Willa said, unable to keep a note of happiness from her voice. Dr. Kincaid closed his book. "And how do you feel about that?" Willa considered the question, thinking of Ben's steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "I feel," she began, searching for the right words. "I feel like something important is beginning." Her father nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "He seems like a good man, solid, the kind who stands by his principles." "He is," Willa agreed, thinking of how Ben had risked everything to help her a stranger simply because it was right. "Then I'm happy for you, my dear." Dr. Kincaid rose and kissed her forehead. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. I certainly am." With those words warming her heart, Willa retired to her room, placing the carved horse on her bedside table where it would be the first thing she saw each morning. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts were filled with images of midnight rescues, dawn confrontations, and blue eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. The weeks that followed brought a steady transformation to Willow Creek. With Hartford's influence removed, the town began to breathe more freely, like a body recovering from a long illness. Jack Thornton's return as sheriff heralded a new era of fair governance, and businesses that had struggled under Hartford's stranglehold began to prosper again. For Willa, the changes were both external and internal. Externally, she found herself respected in a way she hadn't been before, not dismissed as merely the doctor's outspoken daughter, but acknowledged as someone of substance and courage. Internally, she was discovering new dimensions to herself through her deepening relationship with Ben. True to his word, he called on her regularly, sometimes riding into town just to share a brief conversation on her porch, other times taking her for long rides across the Montana countryside. They picnicked by Crystal Creek, where Willa taught Ben the names of wildflowers, and he showed her how to skip stones across the water's surface. They attended the town's harvest festival together, where Ben's skill at the shooting contest earned him a blue ribbon he promptly presented to Willa with a flourish that made her laugh. With each encounter, Willa felt herself falling deeper into something she had never expected, but now couldn't imagine living without. Ben was unlike any man she had known, thoughtful yet decisive, strong yet gentle, respecting her independence while offering a steady presence she could lean on if she chose. On a crisp October afternoon about 6 weeks after the events at the town square, Ben arrived at the Kincaid home with a proposal. "McAllister wants to throw a celebration at the Rockingham," he explained as they walked through town, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their boots. "To mark our partnership being official, he's invited half the county, and I was hoping you and your father would come as my special guests." "We'd be honored," Willa replied, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "When is this grand affair?" "This Saturday." "There'll be food, dancing, probably too much of McAllister's homebrew whiskey." Ben glanced down at her with a smile. "Might even convince me to show off my dancing skills if a certain lady would agree to partner with me." Willa raised an eyebrow. "Dancing skills?" "You've been holding out on me, Mr. Quinn." "I contain multitudes of surprises," he replied solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with humor. "Though I should warn you, my dancing was learned in Texas dance halls of questionable repute." "How scandalous," Willa teased. "What would the good ladies of Willow Creek say? Probably that you're keeping company with a rogue of the first order." Ben's tone was light, but there was a question in his eyes, a seeking of reassurance. Willa squeezed his arm. "Then it's fortunate that I've never been overly concerned with town gossip." The tension in his shoulders eased. "One of the many things I admire about you." They had reached the general store, where Willa needed to purchase supplies for her father's medical practice. As they stepped inside, several heads turned their way. While most of the town had accepted their courtship, there remained a faction of Hartford supporters who viewed Willa with resentment for her role in his downfall. Mrs. Perkins, the banker's wife, deliberately turned her back as Willa approached the counter. The storekeeper, Mr. Lawson, gave her an apologetic look but served her promptly, ignoring Mrs. Perkins' obvious displeasure. "Don't mind her," Ben murmured as they left the store, packages in hand. "Some people find change difficult to accept. It's not the first time I've faced disapproval, and I doubt it will be the last," Willer replied philosophically. "Papa says I was born challenging conventions," Ben chuckled. "I can believe that." They continued their walk, stopping to greet acquaintances and discuss the latest news. The railroad had altered its proposed route to bypass Miller's property. The harvest had been bountiful, and rumors suggested that Hartford's trial would begin soon in Helena. As they neared the doctor's house again, Ben slowed his pace. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," he said, his tone growing more serious. Willa looked up at him expectantly. "What is it?" "The partnership with McAllister comes with a house, a proper one, not just the bunkhouse I've been staying in. It's on the eastern edge of the property, overlooking the valley." He cleared his throat. "It's a good-sized place, 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, more space than one man needs." Willa's heart began to beat faster as she realized where this conversation was headed. McAllister had it built for his son and daughter-in-law before they decided to move to California instead, Ben continued. "It's been standing empty for years. Needs a woman's touch," he says. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "What I'm trying to say, Willa, is that I'd like you to see it. To consider," he broke off, then took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I've loved you since the night I cut those chains and you stepped out of that barn, more concerned with saving Miller than your own safety." Willa felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "Ben, I know it's soon," he hurried on. "I know proper courting takes time. But I also know what I feel, and I hope you might feel the same." Willa reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I do," she said simply. "I love you too." The joy that spread across Ben's features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Then will you consider it, becoming my wife, making that empty house a home?" "Yes," Willa answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Ben's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected such a direct answer. "You're sure?" "What about your dreams of becoming a doctor?" Willa smiled at his concern for her ambitions. "There's no reason I can't pursue both dreams, being your wife and continuing my medical studies. Papa has connections at a medical college in Denver that accepts women. It would mean time away sometimes, but we could make it work if you're willing." "Of course I'm willing," Ben said fervently. "I'd never ask you to give up something that matters to you. We'll find a way together." The certainty in his voice, the unwavering support for her aspirations, confirmed for Willa that she was making the right choice. This was a partnership of equals, a meeting of kindred spirits. "Then yes, Ben Quinn, I will marry you and make that house a home." Ben's face lit with such happiness that Willa felt her own heart swell in response. He glanced quickly around. They were still on a public street. After all, then bent to kiss her, a brief but tender touch of his lips to hers that sent warmth spreading through her entire being. "I should speak to your father," he said when they parted, his voice slightly unsteady. "He already approves of you," Willa assured him. "But yes, he'd appreciate the gesture." They walked the remaining distance to the Kincaid home hand in hand, their steps light with shared joy. As they reached the gate, Ben paused once more. "Saturday at the celebration," he said. "We can announce it then if you'd like. Make it official before everyone." Willa nodded, happiness bubbling through her like a spring. "I'd like that very much." He kissed her once more, quickly, before heading up the path to speak with Dr. Kincaid. Willa watched him go, marveling at how life could change so dramatically in such a short time. 6 weeks ago, she had been locked in a barn for speaking out against injustice. Now she was planning a future with a man who had not only rescued her, but had shown her that true partnership in love and in principle was possible. The thought of their future together, of building a life on the foundation of mutual respect and shared values, filled her with a deep, steady joy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, just as they had faced Hartford and his schemes with courage, determination, and an unshakable belief in each other. The day of the celebration dawned clear and cool, the October sun casting a golden light over the rolling landscape of the Rockingham Ranch. Willa stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and complemented her auburn hair, which she had arranged in an elegant updo for the occasion. On her bedside table sat Ben's carved wooden horse, a reminder of how their story had begun. Beside it lay a small velvet pouch containing the ring Ben had given her the day before, a simple band of gold set with a small emerald that had belonged to his mother. "It's not fancy," he had apologized, "but it has history." "It's perfect," Willa had assured him, loving that the ring represented a connection to his past even as they built their future together. Now she slipped the ring onto her finger, admiring how it caught the light. She and Ben had agreed to keep their engagement private until the celebration, wanting to share their happiness with everyone at once. A knock at her door preceded her father's entrance. Dr. Kincaid stopped in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in the sight of his daughter. "You look beautiful," he said. "Every inch your mother's daughter," Willa smiled, touching the ring on her finger. "Do you think she would approve of Ben of everything?" "Without a doubt," he replied firmly. "She would see what I see, a man of integrity who loves you for exactly who you are, not despite it." He offered his arm. "Shall we? Our escort should be arriving any moment." As if on cue, the sound of hoofbeats announced Ben's arrival. Willa's pulse quickened at the prospect of seeing him, a reaction that had not diminished with familiarity. If anything, her feelings had only deepened as she came to know him better, his quiet strength, his dry humor, his unfailing kindness. When they stepped onto the porch, Willa's breath caught. Ben sat astride his black stallion, but today he was accompanied by a light buggy drawn by a handsome chestnut mare. He had traded his usual working clothes for a formal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and his dark hair was neatly combed beneath his best hat. But it was the smile that transformed his face when he saw her that made Willa's heart skip. "Miss Kincaid," he greeted her formally, though his eyes conveyed a much more intimate message. "Doc, your carriage awaits," Dr. Kincaid chuckled. "Very fancy, Quinn. The partnership must be agreeing with you." "In more ways than one," Ben agreed, his gaze returning to Willa as he helped her into the buggy, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. The ride to the Rockingham was filled with pleasant anticipation. The ranch was one of the largest in the area, stretching across several thousand acres of prime grazing land nestled against the foothills. As they approached, Willa could see that McAllister had spared no expense for the celebration. Colorful bunting decorated the main house and barn, tables laden with food had been set up in the yard, and a wooden platform had been constructed for dancing. Already, dozens of guests had arrived, ranchers and their families, townspeople from Willow Creek, and even a few visitors from neighboring settlements. A small band was setting up their instruments, and children ran playing between the tables while their parents socialized. "Quite the gathering," Dr. Kincaid observed. "McAllister must be proud to have you as a partner." "He says it's as much for me as for him," Ben replied. "Wants everyone to know the Rockingham will be in good hands when he decides to retire for good." As Ben helped Willa from the buggy, she noticed several people watching them with interest. Their courtship had been the subject of much speculation in the town, especially given the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. "Quinn, there you are," called a booming voice, and a stout man with a shock of white hair and ruddy cheeks approached. "And this must be the famous Miss Kincaid I've heard so much about." He took Willa's hand in his large one, his grip firm but gentle. "Angus McAllister, at your service, miss. My new partner here talks about you so much I feel I know you already." Willa smiled, liking the old rancher immediately. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. McAllister, and congratulations on your partnership. Ben speaks very highly of you." "Does he now?" McAllister's eyes twinkled. "Well, I won't keep you. Plenty of folks eager to meet the woman who stood up to Hartford and won. Make yourselves at home. Food's plentiful, whiskey's strong, and the company's good." He clapped Ben on the shoulder before moving off to greet other guests. Ben offered Willa his arm. Shall we mingle, or would you rather see the house first? It's just over that rise. He nodded toward a gentle slope to the east. Let's join the party for now, Willa suggested. We can slip away later for a private tour. They made their way through the gathering, stopping frequently to chat with acquaintances. Willa was introduced to the ranch hands, who regarded Ben with obvious respect, and to neighboring ranchers curious about the woman who had captured the attention of the rocking MTK's newest partner. Jack and Martha Thornton arrived, Jack now wearing the sheriff's badge with the same authority he had years ago. Reginald Miller came too, moving more easily now that he had recovered from his ordeal, eager to express his gratitude to Willa once again. Never thought I'd see another harvest, the elderly rancher told her, his voice thick with emotion. Thanks to you and Quinn here, I'm looking forward to many more. As afternoon mellowed into evening, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. The band struck up a lively tune and couples began to form on the dance platform. Ben turned to Willa with a formal bow. May I have this dance, Miss Kincaid? I believe you promised to demonstrate those questionable dance hall skills, she teased, placing her hand in his. As it turned out, Ben was a surprisingly graceful dancer, leading Willa through a series of dances with confidence and ease. They moved together as if they had been partners for years, anticipating each other's movements, falling into a natural rhythm that had other couples watching in admiration. Where did you really learn to dance like this? Willa asked as they circled the floor to a waltz. Ben's lips twitched with amusement. My mother insisted all three of her sons learn properly. Said no Quinn boy would embarrass her by clomping around like a draft horse at social gatherings. The image of a younger Ben dutifully practicing dance steps under his mother's watchful eye made Willa smile. She taught you well. She'd have liked you, Ben said softly. Strong-minded women always got along in our household. As the dance ended, McAllister called for everyone's attention, raising a glass for a toast. To new beginnings and successful partnerships, he proclaimed. The Rocking M has been my life's work, and I couldn't be prouder to know it will continue to thrive under Ben Quinn's stewardship when I'm too old and ornery to manage it myself. Cheers and applause followed, with calls for Ben to say a few words. He moved to McAllister's side, his expression a mixture of pride and humility. I'm honored by Angus's trust and by all of you being here today, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. When I came to Montana 2 years ago, I was just looking for work and a fresh start. I never expected to find a home, much less a future like this. His eyes found Willa in the crowd, but sometimes life offers more than you dared hope for. There was something in his gaze that made Willa's breath catch a question, an invitation. She nodded slightly, understanding what he was asking. Ben's face broke into a smile as he continued. Since we're celebrating new beginnings, I have another announcement to make. He extended his hand toward Willa. Miss Kincaid, would you join me? A murmur of interest rippled through the gathering as Willa made her way to Ben's side. His hand found hers, warm and reassuring. Yesterday I asked Willa Kincaid to be my wife, Ben announced, his voice clear and certain, and to my great joy she accepted. A moment of surprised silence was followed by enthusiastic applause and congratulations. McAllister looked pleased but not surprised, suggesting Ben had already confided in him. Dr. Kincaid raised his glass in a silent toast to the couple, his eyes bright with happiness for his daughter. Martha Thornton was the first to embrace Willa. I knew it from the moment I saw you two together that night, she whispered. Some things are just meant to be. As more well-wishers surrounded them, Ben kept Willa's hand firmly in his, as if reluctant to let her go even for a moment. The celebration took on a new energy with the engagement announcement, with many toasts offered to the future Mr. and Mrs. Quinn. Later, as the party continued under the stars, Ben managed to draw Willa away from the crowd. I'd like to show you something, he said, leading her toward the eastern ridge. They walked hand in hand along a well-worn path, the sounds of music and laughter fading behind them. As they crested the rise, Willa gasped at the sight before her. A 2-story house stood on a gentle slope, its windows glowing with lamplight against the darkness. A wide porch wrapped around the front and a chimney rose from the peaked roof. "This is it," Ben said softly. "Our home, if you approve." Willa squeezed his hand. "It's beautiful." "Wait until you see inside." He led her up the path to the front door, which he opened with a flourish. McAllister had some of the ranch wives help get it ready, said a house needs a woman's touch before it can really be called a home. The interior was simple but well crafted, with polished wooden floors and large windows that would fill the rooms with light during the day. A staircase curved up to the second floor, and a stone fireplace dominated the main living area. Someone had arranged wildflowers in vases throughout the house and laid fires ready to be lit. "It's perfect," Willa breathed, moving from room to room, already imagining their life together within these walls. "Absolutely perfect." Ben watched her with a tender expression. "There's a room that would make a fine study for your medical books, and another that could be set up as a small examining room if you wanted to see patients here sometimes." Willa turned to him, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. "You've really thought about this, haven't you?" "About how to support my ambitions." "Of course," he replied simply. "Your dreams matter to me because you matter to me, all of you, not just the parts that fit neatly into what society expects of a wife." Willa stepped into his arms, overwhelmed by the depth of her feelings for this man. "I love you, Ben Quinn." Ben's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Willa Kincaid, soon to be Willa Quinn." He kissed her then, a kiss that held both tenderness and passion, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally returned to the celebration, Willa's cheeks were flushed and her heart full to bursting. The party continued well into the night, with dancing and storytelling beneath the vast Montana sky studded with stars. As Willa and Ben moved together to a slow, sweet melody, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a locked barn on a moonless night to an open future bright with possibility. What had begun in crisis had blossomed into something enduring and profound, a love founded on shared values and mutual respect. "What are you thinking about?" Ben murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Willa looked up at him, this man who had cut the bolts that held her captive and in doing so had unlocked something essential within her as well. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinations." Ben's smile was tender as he drew her closer. "And our journey is just beginning." Around them, lanterns glowed like earthbound stars, music filled the air, and the future stretched before them wide open and full of promise, like the Montana sky above. The wedding of Ben Quinn and Willa Kincaid took place on a crisp December morning in 1878, with snow dusting the mountains around Willow Creek like powdered sugar. The small church was filled to capacity with well-wishers, ranchers, and townspeople, the entire staff of the Rocking M, and even Marshall Davis, who had returned to witness the union of the couple whose courage had exposed Hartford's corruption. Willa wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha Thornton had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding dress. In her auburn hair, carefully arranged in an elegant updo, she wore a circlet of winter holly and white roses. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes sought and found Ben's, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new suit, his expression one of awe and devotion. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and cherish, to support and respect, to face life's challenges together as true partners. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ben's kiss was both tender and reverent, a sealing of their commitment before God and community. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, was joyous and lively, with abundant food, music, and dancing. Gifts were presented, speeches made, and toasts offered to the happiness of the newlyweds. Through it all, Ben kept Willa close, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Mrs. Quinn," he would murmur in her ear occasionally, testing the sound of her new name, his voice filled with wonder. As evening approached, they bid farewell to their guests and departed for their new home on the Rocking M, where they would begin their life together. The house that had stood empty for so long welcomed them with warmth and light, fires burning in the hearths against the winter chill. That night, as snow began to fall outside their bedroom window, Willa and Ben discovered the deepest expression of their love, learning each other in the most intimate way, their bodies finding the same natural harmony their spirits had recognized from the beginning. Afterward, lying in Ben's arms, Willa traced the contours of his face in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. "Happy?" he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Completely," she assured him. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He drew her closer. "I keep thinking about that night I found you locked in Hartford's barn, how different everything might have been if I hadn't ridden by when I did." "I believe we would have found each other anyway," Willa said softly. "Some things are meant to be." The winter passed in a haze of happiness as they settled into married life. Willa divided her time between assisting her father with his medical practice in town and making their house into a home. Ben threw himself into his partnership with McAllister, learning everything he could about managing the ranch while bringing his own expertise with horses to bear. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other from books Ben had ordered specially from Denver, other times simply talking about their day or making plans for the future. On clear nights, they would often step out onto the porch to gaze at the stars, wrapped in a single blanket against the cold, marveling at the vastness of the universe and the miracle that had brought them together. Spring came to Montana in a rush of wildflowers and new grass, the land awakening from its winter sleep. With the warmer weather came news from Helena. Hartford had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His vast holdings were being sold off to settle debts and claims, bringing an end to his empire of intimidation and greed. "Justice does prevail sometimes," Ben remarked when they received the news, "though it often needs a helping hand, or a persistent voice," Willa added with a smile. As summer approached, Willa received a letter from the Women's Medical College of Denver, accepting her application to begin studies in the fall term. She and Ben had discussed the arrangement at length. She would spend 3 months in Denver, then return to Montana for the winter, continuing her studies through correspondence and practice with her father. It would mean separation, but both were committed to making it work. "Your dreams are as important as mine," Ben insisted when she expressed concern about leaving him. "We'll manage, and I'll visit when I can." It was this unwavering support that confirmed for Willa, yet again, the rightness of their union. In a world where women's ambitions were often dismissed or actively discouraged, she had found a partner who valued her mind as much as her heart. In late June, just as the days were reaching their longest, Willa made a discovery that added a new dimension to their happiness. After several mornings of unexpected nausea and a missed monthly cycle, she consulted with her father, who confirmed her suspicion. She was with child. That evening, she waited until after dinner to share the news with Ben. They were sitting on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I received a letter today," she began, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "From the medical college." Ben turned to her, his expression concerned. "Have they changed their mind about accepting you?" "No, nothing like that." Willa took a deep breath. "But I'm afraid I won't be able to attend this fall after all." At his questioning look, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Ben." In January, if my father's calculations are correct. Ben's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "A baby," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to have a child," Willa nodded, tears of joy springing to her eyes at his reaction. "Are you happy?" In answer, Ben gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A child, Willa, our child." He pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes shining. "Are you disappointed about the medical college?" "Not at all," she assured him. "The college will still be there in a few years. This," she placed her hand over his on her stomach, "is a different kind of dream coming true." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Ben's hand rested protectively over the place where their child grew, and Willa felt a sense of completion unlike anything she had known before. From the moment Ben had cut the chains on that barn door, freeing her from imprisonment, They had been traveling toward this future together, a future built on love, respect, and the courage to stand for what was right. The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. A room adjacent to their bedroom was transformed into a nursery, with Ben crafting a cradle from cherry wood, his skilled hands creating a thing of beauty for their child. Willa sewed tiny garments and quilts, often sitting by the window in the afternoon light, her thoughts turning to the new life growing within her. Dr. Kincaid was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather and visited often to check on Willa's progress. "Everything looks perfect," he assured them during one such visit in late fall, as golden leaves drifted past the windows. "You're as healthy as a horse, my dear, and the baby is growing just as it should." December brought heavy snows that blanketed the land in white silence. As Christmas approached, Willa and Ben celebrated their first anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, exchanging gifts before the fire, a new medical text for Willa, ordered months ago from back east, and for Ben, a finely tooled leather journal Willa had commissioned from the saddle maker in town. "For recording our family's history," she explained as he ran his fingers over the embossed cover, beginning with how a brave cowboy cut the bolts at midnight to rescue a troublesome woman. Ben smiled, pulling her close. "The best decision I ever made." New Year's came and went, and as January progressed, Willa felt the first stirrings of labor on a night when the moon was full and the sky clear, stars sharp as diamond chips against the black velvet of the heavens. Ben rode for her father while Martha Thornton, who had experience as a midwife, came to stay and assist with the birth. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as dawn broke on January 17, 1880, Willa delivered a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same clear blue as her father's. When Ben was finally allowed into the bedroom to meet his daughter, his hands trembled as he took the tiny bundle from Willa. "She's perfect," he whispered, awe evident in every line of his face, just like her mother. They named her Elena Catherine Quinn, after their respective mothers, but called her Ellie from the start. She was a good-natured baby with her father's calm temperament and her mother's curious spirit, and she quickly became the center of their world. Spring returned to Montana, bringing with it new growth and fresh possibilities. On a warm May afternoon, as Willa sat on a blanket in the grass outside their home, watching Ben play with 4-month-old Ellie, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a locked barn to a home filled with love, from standing alone against injustice to finding a partner who shared her convictions, from speaking out at great personal risk to creating a family where truth and courage were valued above all, it had been a journey of unexpected turns and profound discoveries. Ben looked up, catching her thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Quinn," he called, settling Ellie against his shoulder where she promptly began to play with his shirt collar. Willa smiled, rising to join her family on the sun-warmed grass. "I was just thinking about chains," she said, "and how sometimes what seems like an ending is really a beginning in disguise." Ben nodded, understanding in his eyes as he reached out to draw her close, their daughter nestled between them. "The best kind of beginning," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "One that never ends." As the Montana sun bathed them in golden light, Willa knew with absolute certainty that the bonds they had forged of love, commitment, and shared purpose were stronger than any chains could ever be. What had started with a midnight rescue had blossomed into a lifetime of freedom, found in the most unexpected of places, each other's hearts. Together they had created something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of courage and love that would continue long after that night when they locked her in the barn for speaking out, until the cowboy cut the bolts at midnight.